What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the Apple iPhone SE 2022. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is basically the entry-level Samsung S series, and similarly, the iPhone SE is basically the entry-level iPhone, and both these phones have the same kind of idea, basically giving you some of the features and power of a flagship phone at a more affordable price. So in this video, we're going to be going over the similarities and differences between these two to help you decide which one is a better choice for you. Now, as always, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. And for your convenience, I will be linking to both of these phones in the video description. So for the latest up-to-date pricing, be sure to check out those links because this does change from time to time. But with that being said, let's get started. So with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 411, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of about 85.3%. With the iPhone SE 2022, we're getting a 4.7-inch Retina IPS LCD display with a resolution of 750 by 1334, a PPI of 326, an aspect ratio of 16:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of about 65.4%. So between the two, I would definitely say the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has a significantly better display in pretty much every way. First of all, it's much larger at 6.4 inches versus 4.7 inches. So when you're doing any kind of content consumption, whether you're streaming videos, viewing photos, playing a game, whatever you're doing, even when you're just using the phone in general, you're going to get a better experience with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE because things are going to be a lot easier to see. Pressing buttons and all of that is going to be easier. So in general, I do think having a larger display like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be a better choice for most people. Now, sure, there is such thing as a display that's too large because there are phones out there that are a little bit bulky and uncomfortable to hold, but I do think at 6.4 inches with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it's not really one of them. 6.4 inches is big enough to give you the benefits of having a larger display, but also not too big, so it's still going to be pretty comfortable to hold for most people. Conversely, with the iPhone SE, 4.7 inches is really small for a display, especially by today's standards. This phone basically has the body of an iPhone 8, and maybe back then when the iPhone 8 came out, 4.7 inches for a display might have been more acceptable, but nowadays, I want to say the average smartphone has a 6.5-inch display, something around there, give or take, so 4.7 inches is significantly smaller than that. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE also has a much better form factor at 20:9 versus 16:9. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a much taller and more narrow form factor. So when you're viewing things in landscape mode, for example, it's going to be a lot more immersive and cinematic. And even when you're just reading stuff, you can fit more on the screen without having to scroll as much. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE also has a much better quality display. With a higher resolution, you're going to get a sharper and crisper image here. And with the Super AMOLED display, you're going to get better looking colors and better brightness as well. You can even see this from the viewing angles. As you can see here, despite both phones being at 100% brightness, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is a lot easier to see, whereas with the iPhone SE, for what it is, it honestly isn't bad, but at the same time, the S21 FE just looks better in general. And finally, one other good thing about the S21 FE is that this phone has a 120Hz refresh rate, so the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. So when you're consuming content, whether you're streaming a video, playing a game, whatever, anything really with motion on the screen, you're going to get a better experience. And even when you're just navigating through the phone in general, it's going to feel a little bit more premium. Now the iPhone, on the other hand, only has a 60Hz display, and although this isn't really bad, the experience in general is going to feel pretty average and it's not going to feel quite as premium. Now both of these phones have 128GB of internal storage, but the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has microSD card expansion and the iPhone SE does not. Now keep in mind, the iPhone SE does start out at 64GB of internal storage, and you can also get a version with 256. Now for me personally, I just got the 128GB version because it was a $50 difference, and to me that makes the most sense. At a price range of over $400 for this phone, to me spending an extra $50 to get double the storage was really worth it. Now if you don't do a whole lot with your phone, then this might be a different story. But overall, I do think 128 gigabytes is a nice sweet spot because 256 is a little bit high for most people. Unless of course you're a power user, then by all means go for it. But in my opinion, 128 gigabytes is more than the average person is gonna need. But at the same time, if you are a power user, you can get by with it. Now for the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, there's no 64 gigabyte version, but there is a 256 gigabyte version. But again, this phone only has 128. But that being said, just like with the iPhone SE, 128 gigabytes is really a good amount of storage for most people. So unless you're really a power user and you're expecting to have a bunch of apps and photos and videos and stuff like that, then I would say 128 gigabytes is a perfect amount of storage. Now that being said, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does have microSD card expansion once again, so it does have a bit of an advantage because if you have a bunch of photos and videos and want to offload that stuff, you can't really do that with the iPhone. Sure, you could use iCloud, but with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, you could also use Google Drive if you really wanted to. So at the end of the day, no matter how you look at it, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, since it does have microSD card expansion and the iPhone doesn't, is going to have a bit of an advantage. Now both of these phones do have wireless charging, so if that's a feature that's important to you, you'll be happy to know that with both of these phones, you can use that feature. That's really one of the benefits of getting a phone like these, as opposed to maybe a higher end mid-range phone, because most mid-range phones, like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G for example, aren't going to have wireless charging, whereas these phones that aren't really that much more do have wireless charging and several other features that you typically only find in flagship phones. Now for security features, both of these phones do have fingerprint scanners. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it's right here in the display. And with the iPhone SE, it's right here on the home button, which by the way is a feature that this phone does of course have. Definitely a feature that here in 2022, we don't really see every day. But the difference here is that the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does have Face Unlock, and for whatever reason, the iPhone SE does not. But that being said, let's go ahead and give these fingerprint scanners a try and see how well they work. So starting with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, there we go, one more time. And there we go, real fast and responsive, no issues here. Moving on to the iPhone SE. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both of these fingerprint scanners are real fast and responsive, no issues here. So even though the iPhone SE doesn't have Face Unlock, it's still really easy to get into and you're probably not going to have any issues. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we got a 32 megapixel front facing camera, hole punch design, looks real nice. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup here with the 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. For video, this phone can shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras, so real good if you want to take some high quality videos. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is definitely a great option for that. Now with the iPhone SE, we got a 7 megapixel front facing camera right here on the top bezel. Then on the back, we just got a single camera, and this camera is 12 megapixels. Now one thing I do want to point out, in case you've been looking at other maybe mid-range phones that typically have 40, 50, 60 megapixel cameras, it's a little different with these phones because even though the megapixels aren't quite as high, these phones being pretty much entry-level flagship phones have much stronger sensors than your typical mid-range phone. So again, even though they don't have like 50 megapixel cameras or anything like that, the cameras on these phones in general are going to be much higher quality than most mid-range phones. Now that being said, I do think the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does have a much better camera setup here, because while the iPhone SE only has one normal camera, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE not only has an ultra-wide camera too, but also has a telephoto lens. So in general, if you're going to be taking lots of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, then the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is probably going to fit your needs quite a bit better. In addition to this, I do think the quality of the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE's photos are a little bit better. Now, compared to a normal iPhone like the iPhone 13 or 13 Pro Max, it's a little bit more debatable. But with the iPhone SE, even though the camera is still pretty good, the colors and details look a little bit better with the S21 FE. So again, if you want to take some real high quality photos and really just get the best pictures and features you can, between the two, I would say the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is probably going to be the way to go. And and this goes for video as well. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, you can shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second in both the rear and front cameras once again, but with the iPhone SE, you can shoot 4K in the rear camera at 60 frames per second as well, but you can only shoot in 1080p in the front. So although the quality is pretty similar, you're going to get a little more versatility with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. If you want to take higher quality selfie videos, for example, you can with this phone, whereas you can't with the iPhone SE. In addition to this, one really big factor when it comes to videos is audio. And in that department, I will say the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is much better by a long shot. In fact, I've used both of these phones to record videos for this channel, and I can say by far, everything I've recorded with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE comes out much better, whereas with the iPhone SE, it's passable, but it's not nearly as good. So overall, if you're planning on taking a lot of photos and recording lots of videos, and you want the highest quality you can get and a wide variety of features, I would say the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be your best option here. But if you're a more casual camera user, maybe you still want to get some really nice photos here and there, but you're not going to be taking pictures and recording videos constantly, then the iPhone SE will still be perfectly fine, and in fact, it's probably still going to be better than most mid-range phones as well. Now internally, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. Now keep in mind with this phone, there is a variant that has 8GB of RAM, but the specific phone in this video only has 6GB of RAM. Now with the iPhone SE, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the Apple A15 Bionic processor. Now both of these phones do have 5G connectivity as well, so if you want a 5G phone, you won't need to worry because both of these phones of course are 5G phones, so you get access to the latest technology and the 5G network, all that good stuff. But in general, despite being pretty close in processing power, the iPhone SE is a little bit more powerful. I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both of these phones, and with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we got a single core score of 1081 and a multi-core score of 3227. With the iPhone SE, we got a single core score of 1729 and a multi-core score of 4619. So as you can see here, the iPhone SE is faster and more powerful overall, but I will say honestly, both of these phones are at the level where you're probably not going to notice the difference a whole lot. I mean, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is still a flagship phone, and this is still an insane amount of processing power. I mean, there's really nothing that this phone can't do, because with these phones, despite the iPhone SE technically having more processing power, no matter what you're doing, whether you're playing games, streaming videos, just browsing the web, going on social media, whatever the case may be, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is still going to feel really fast in all of it. And in addition to this, again, the display on this phone is just so much better, to the point where even though the iPhone SE is much faster and might run certain games a little bit better, I would much rather use the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE to play games, simply because the display is going to make the experience so much better. So overall, of course, if processing power is your top priority and you don't really care about the display a whole lot, then the iPhone SE is going to have an advantage. But when it comes to the value that processing power really brings, again, I do think these phones are at the level where it's not really going to matter a whole lot, because with phones like these, how much faster can you really go? So again, while the iPhone SE technically does have a better processor, I still would take this difference with a grain of salt, because I want to say for most people, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be plenty fast enough. Now the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has a 4500 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. With the iPhone SE, we got a 2406 mAh battery that supports 18 watt fast charging. So it's no question here which phone has the better battery. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be way better when it comes to battery life. And not only that, but with the better fast charging, it's going to charge up a little bit faster and save you a bit of time. Now, honestly, I don't really think the difference in fast charging is going to matter a whole lot for most people, because chances are you might have your phone plugged in all day anyway. But aside from that, a 4500 mAh battery versus a 2406 mAh battery is definitely quite the difference. Honestly, with the iPhone SE, having a 2406 mAh battery, sure, Apple does optimize their batteries pretty well, but that is still a pretty small battery. Whereas with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, a 4500 mAh battery isn't the biggest battery you can get, but it is pretty close. So even though this phone does have stuff like a Super AMOLED display, super high refresh rate, all kinds of things that do consume a bit of energy, this phone does have pretty good battery life. I can even tell you from experience. I've actually had this phone sitting on for a couple of days and I haven't charged it, and I do use it quite a bit, and we're still at 72%. So that definitely just goes to show, if you need a phone with really good battery life, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is going to be a great option. But that being said, I will give the iPhone SE credit. I use almost exclusively just wireless charging to charge this phone, and it does charge up pretty fast. And for what it is, I do think the battery life is pretty decent, certainly much better than the previous iPhone SE. So even though the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE clearly has a better battery here, the iPhone SE really isn't that bad. Now both of these phones also have NFC, so if you want to use contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay or Apple Pay, you of course can with either of these phones. Now, is that really a surprise? Absolutely not. These are basically flagship phones, and nowadays I honestly expect NFC in even mid-range phones. But still, just know if you want to do any of those tap and pay services, you can with either of these phones. Now we've kind of talked a little about the design. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it does look really nice and modern. The front-facing camera looks great, and despite being a little bit on the larger side, the phone isn't too bulky either. It has a nice matte finish, and as you can see, I do have some fingerprints on there, but it's really not that bad. Now with the iPhone SE, this phone honestly looks pretty outdated, which it is. It's basically the body of an iPhone 8, so that is to be expected, but I will say the design is still pretty slim. And if you're looking for a phone that's a little bit more compact, then the fact that this phone is so small might actually be a good thing for you. I know there are plenty of people out there who just really don't like big phones. So if you are one of those people, then forget everything I said about the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE being better because it has a larger display. Because in your case, you might actually want the iPhone SE because it's a little bit smaller. Because in general, since larger phones are getting more and more popular, they really aren't making them this small anymore. So the iPhone SE is one of the few phones in this size, if not the only one when it comes to the quality and features. Now another interesting thing about these two phones is the materials. Even though I do think the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE looks a lot better, honestly the materials in the iPhone SE feel much higher quality. The Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is basically just plastic all the way around, except of course the glass display. And while the build quality is pretty solid and doesn't feel bad, this phone basically looks and feels exactly like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, which as good as that phone is still just a mid-range phone. Whereas with the iPhone SE, even though this is a really entry-level phone compared to the iPhone 13 for example, it still does feel really high quality. It's got some glass and metal in it, and even the weight just feels really good. So if that's something that's really important to you, then definitely keep this in mind. Because between the two, the iPhone SE, despite maybe not looking as modern, feels quite a bit more premium. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now honestly, for what it is, I don't think the iPhone SE is really bad, but despite that, I do think the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is better in almost every way. First of all, again, the display is just so much better. If you're doing any kind of content consumption, you're really going to appreciate the S21 FE, whereas with the iPhone SE, I honestly wouldn't really feel comfortable even watching videos on this phone, because again, the display is just so small that it's not really going to be the greatest experience. When it comes to storage, sure the iPhone SE does have a decent amount of storage, but the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has pretty much the same amount, and it does have microSD card expansion. So if you're really a power user and you have a bunch of photos and videos, microSD card expansion is really going to help out with that. The S21 FE also has many more features, from stuff like the camera, having a telephoto lens and ultra-wide camera, to even just having face unlock, whereas the iPhone SE only has a fingerprint scanner. And in addition to all this, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has a much larger battery as well. So if you're using your phone heavily, but you're not always around a charger, then that's going to be another great advantage the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE has. Really, the only two advantages I see with the iPhone SE are the materials feeling a little bit more premium and the processor being a lot more powerful. The only other reason I would see choosing the iPhone SE over the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is if you really want to use iOS and you don't want to use Android. Because of course, when it comes down to it, iOS and Android are completely different systems, and most people that use one platform don't want to use the other. So if that's your situation, if you really want to use iOS, then of course you're going to want to go with the iPhone SE. And in that case, for what it is, the iPhone SE really isn't a bad phone. But in general, for most people, if you're completely indifferent between iOS and Android, I do think the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE is just a better device overall due to having better features and a much better display. Now, if you want to learn more about either of these phones or see their individual photo and video samples, be sure to check out my full reviews of them on the channel. But I hope you enjoyed this comparison, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. But as always, I will see you in the next video.